Hello, my dear sleepy listener. Tonight, we drift together through arches of marble, past jasmine-scented courtyards, and beneath banners rippling in the dry northern wind of Hindustan. You're about to fall gently, dreamily, into the story of a court where poets and warriors dined beneath mirrored ceilings, where silk rustled softly behind stone screens, and where emperors dreamed in Persian while speaking in Hindavi. Before you drift away into peaceful slumber, please take a moment to like this video, leave a gentle comment about your favourite historical moment, and subscribe to keep these soothing tales coming your way. I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? What time is it where you are now? Dim the lights, settle in, and let these gentle whispers of history lull you into sleep. You awaken beside a river bank. The water is low, and the air carries dust. This soft, rhythmic creaking of carts mixes with the distant crack of gunpowder. You are near Panipat, in the north of India, and the year is 1526. A slender man in his early 40s surveys the battlefield from horseback. His name is Zahir-ud-Din Muhammad Babur. He is the descendant of Timur on one side and Genghis Khan on the other, but tonight he is simply a man hoping the wind favours his cannon. The Mughals are not yet emperors. Babur has spent his life bouncing between cities, betrayed by brothers, clashing with Uzbek warlords, clinging to broken thrones in the Afghan hills. He writes poetry in Turkish and carries a garden layout in his mind. His notebooks are filled with sketches of flora, food, and fortresses, but also the things he longs to build: water channels, fruit terraces, libraries, and orchards. You notice that despite the upcoming battle, Babur is calm. He counts the blades of grass, he pets the flank of his warhorse, and then he kneels to pray, invoking fate, lineage, and a hunger for permanence. It is the first battle of Panipat. Opposing him, Ibrahim Lodi, the Sultan of Delhi. His war elephants are thunderous, and his army outnumbers Babur's more than 2-1. But Babur brings new music to the battlefield, the rumble of matchlock muskets and the thunder of Ottoman-style field artillery. His tactics are clever, his positioning perfect. The clash is brief. As dawn warms the dust, the Delhi Sultanate falls. Babur walks through the broken battlefield, and he declares, not in joy, but in reflection, that he has claimed Hindustan not for riches or revenge, but for a place to truly stay. Not another camp or temporary shelter, but a home. This moment is often told as a conquest, but listen closely. Some historians note that Babur's own writings are laced with homesickness. He misses the cooler air of Kabul. He misses snow, apricots, and the quiet companionship of mountain paths. His decision to remain in India was not entirely triumphant. It was also melancholic, a quiet surrender to destiny. You follow him to Agra. The city is dry, dusty, and its buildings unimpressive. Babur grumbles in his memoirs about the lack of running water, the scarcity of gardens, the strange tastes of local cuisine. So he begins to shape it. Here is a small, lovely moment. Babur orders a garden to be made, just a few days after the victory. Not a fortress, not a prison, a garden, Chaba, the 4-part Persian garden design, representing paradise. It will have flowing water, neat beds of roses, and symmetrical trees. While his men squabble over treasure, Babur sketches irrigation channels. And yet, all is not tranquil. Even in this first flush of success, whispers of dissent reach his ears. The Indian plain is not yet tame. Rajput lords simmer with resentment. Afghan nobles sulk. Some say Babur's control was shakier than it appears, that rebellions and instability marked his early reign. Historians still question whether the so-called founding of the Mughal Empire was truly secure in Babur's lifetime, or only solidified under his son. At night, Babur writes, he records not just politics and victories, but mango flavours, local customs, types of fish, bird migrations, and his opinion on Indian melons not favourable. His Baburnama, written in Chagatai Turkish, is unlike any king's memoir before him, not stiff proclamations, but stream of consciousness musings, lush and human. And through it all, you remain at his side, invisible but attentive. You follow him to Delhi, where he sits beneath a banyan tree, sketching. You see his fingers stained with ink, his eyes scanning the land for beauty, not just dominion. As the moonlight falls upon Agra's rooftops, and the first jasmine blossoms unfurl in the warm breeze, Babur begins the work of empire not with violence, but with water, poetry, and gardens. The empire has begun, not in gold, but in green. You awaken early, before the sun lifts its golden head over the horizon. The air is cool and damp with dew, and you find yourself beneath a young fig tree. Babur has not yet stirred, but his gardeners are already awake. You hear the gentle rush of water moving through shallow channels, whispering its way around tulip beds and cypress saplings. This is not just a garden. This is the Chaba, the first of its kind in Hindustan, and the beginning of the Mughal dream. The Mughal court in those early days is less a palace, and more a moving world of tents, silk partitions, and shaded courtyards. The camp follows the seasons. It breathes like an organism, folding itself near riverbanks, unfolding again in the foothills. But wherever it pauses, gardens spring up, temporary, yes, but rich in intention. You watch as Baba steps barefoot into his garden, sleeves rolled, a gardener's knife tucked into his sash. He cuts away dead leaves himself. He arranges pebbles by hand. He has won cities through war, but this small patch of organised earth, is what makes him smile. To understand Babur, you must understand his longing for order. He was born among shifting loyalties and splintered borders. The empire he builds is a response to chaos. And so every garden, every water channel, every bed of marigolds is a prayer for symmetry, a reflection of paradise made visible in soil. This idea of paradise on earth, the Jannat, is not merely aesthetic, it is spiritual. In Islamic tradition, paradise is described as a walled garden with flowing rivers and shade-giving trees. Babur, raised with passionate courtly ideals, plants theology into geography, a quirky little detail Babur, despite his poetic soul, was a bit of a critic when it came to nature. He famously disliked the mango, calling it overrated, and found the Indian climate too hot and the insects rather uncivilized. In one moment of charming exasperation, he refers to certain bugs as vile, winged misfortunes. You can almost hear him swatting them with his writing hand. Still, he perseveres. Over time, the gardens evolve, from simple enclosures to tiered marvels with raised walkways, patterned tiles, and domed pavilions by the Yamuna river. Babur lays the foundation for something lasting not merely to impress, but to soothe. Not every emperor begins with cannons and ends with roses. Some scholars debate whether these gardens were truly as influential as they seem. Were they widely copied across India immediately, or romanticised later as emblems of Mughal elegance? It's an open question. Some argue that later emperors, Akbar and Shah Jahan especially, deserve more credit for perfecting the gardener's palace ideal. But even so, Babur's vision was the seed, and what a seed. As the day warms, you move through the garden paths alongside court officials, soldiers, and poets. Everyone pauses to admire the symmetry. You notice how the Mughals build their courts not just upward, in domes and balconies, but outward, in pavilions open to breeze and water. You taste pomegranate seeds chilled in river-cooled clay pots. You smell sandalwood smoke curling from censers. The garden is political, yes, but also personal. It calms nerves before meetings. It softens the edges of ambition. You watch Babur dictate notes for his memoir. He describes not just the flora, but the architecture of birdsong, the order of clouds above a grove, the smoothness of a particular stone. His eye never rests. He is collecting a world. Later, as dusk descends, the garden glows with tiny oil lamps placed along the edges of water channels. Reflections shimmer like falling stars. Babur walks slowly, alone now, lost in thought. You follow quietly behind, a gentle observer. He pauses beside a blooming night lily and whispers a line of verse. Perhaps it's one he's written himself. Or perhaps it's from memory, handed down through centuries. Either way, the silence that follows is full. You sit beneath a neem tree, the air now heavy with nighttime stillness. The empire is still new, unshaped, but this garden, fleeting though it may be, carries the promise of something more permanent. A way of ruling not only with force, but with beauty. And as the stars wheel gently overhead, you feel the land itself exhale, as if acknowledging the arrival not just of a conqueror, but of a dreamer with roots. You awaken to the sound of hooves in soft sand and the dull clang of bronze vessels being packed. The garden is gone, or rather, it has been left behind, its rose beds drying in the sun, its water channels emptied. The court is on the move. Babur has passed away, not long after his son Humayun recovered from a mysterious illness. Some say Babur offered his life in exchange for his son's health. Whether poetic metaphor or whispered truth, the tale lingers in court circles like incense smoke in silk tents. Now, Humayun rides, awkwardly, thoughtfully, his robes slightly too long, his turban not quite settled. He is intelligent, kind, and distracted. You sense in him a longing for something not entirely political. He collects gems, studies astrology, and believes colours should be chosen according to the stars. Before important meetings, he consults the heavens. If Mars is rising, he wears red. If Saturn lingers, he might cancel altogether. You ride beside him across the plains of Hindustan, where the heat warps the horizon. Unlike his father, Humayun struggles to maintain order. Rebellions stir, brothers betray. The Afghan noble Sher Shah Suri rises from Bihar with a keen military mind and a deep sense of administrative order. Humayun underestimates him. You arrive in the city of Kannauj on the eve of battle. The stars are not favourable, but Humayun proceeds anyway. The defeat is swift. Humayun is forced to flee. He tumbles, metaphorically and literally. There are stories of him slipping down stone staircases while retreating, losing not only ground but dignity, and now begins his long exile. You travel west with him, through the dusty borders of Rajasthan and into Persia. The Mughal court becomes nomadic, barely a court at all. You sleep beneath tents stitched hastily with bits of velvet and brocade. There are nights when the only sound is the wind and the occasional sob of a court musician remembering better days. And yet, here in exile, Humayun transforms. In the Persian city of Herat, he finds refuge and a library, a real one. You walk through it, your fingers trailing across leather-bound volumes of Persian poetry and astronomical charts. Humayun befriends Shah Tahmasp of the Safavids. He adopts Persian styles, learns from Safavid architecture and builds alliances over rosewater tea. One charming moment stands out. Humayun reportedly developed a fondness for opium, not for escapism, necessarily, but to aid in long meditations and mystical insight. It was said he would recline on pillows, gaze at constellations, and recite couplets until dawn. Court scribes quietly recorded what they could decipher. Yet, historians debate how much of this was reverence and how much was indulgence. Some portray Humayun as dreamy and philosophical, while others suggest incompetence masked by poetry. Was he a thinker ahead of his time, or simply too soft for the age of steel and rebellion? After 15 long years, with Persian aid, Humayun returns to India. You cross the Khyber Pass with him, the wind colder than you remembered. You watch him reclaim Delhi in 1555, a quieter victory this time. No great battle, just the slow receding of Sher Shah's descendants and the hesitant return of Mughal banners. But then, just months later, fate interrupts. You are in the Purana Kila, the old fort, as Humayun ascends the stairs to his observatory with an armful of books. He trips on his robe. He falls. Some say he paused to kneel at the evening call to prayer and slipped. Others say his own design, an oddly steep staircase, proved fatal. A short fall, a sudden silence. You wait beside his bed as physicians arrive too late. Outside, peacocks call. Inside, the court trembles. The empire is once again leaderless. And now, all eyes turn to a 13-year-old boy reading by candlelight. You awaken in a red sandstone courtyard at dawn. The air is still, the sky an endless wash of saffron and rose. A young boy, no older than 13, stands barefoot beneath an archway, gazing at the horizon. This is Akbar, son of Humayun, and future builder of empires. For now, he is just a boy whose father has died too soon. The court is uneasy. Regents whisper. Generals jockey for influence. But Akbar, even at this tender age, carries a peculiar gravity, as though history itself has taken shelter behind his eyes. You follow him to Kalaner, a small town in the Punjab. There, beneath a humble canopy, a platform is built. Akbar climbs the stairs, and as a soft wind stirs his robes, he is crowned emperor. The ceremony is simple, almost improvised. A red and gold turban, a trembling hand raised in blessing. He is too young to rule in name, so his guardian and tutor, Bayram Khan, becomes the de facto regent, but you can see it already. Akbar listens, he watches, and he remembers. The empire, meanwhile, is brittle. Sher Shah's reforms linger in administration, but local lords resist. Rebellions flare. Rajput kings eye independence. Akbar's first years are a campaign trail, not a coronation tour. You ride with him across mountains and rivers, through swirling dust and monsoon rains. Bayram Khan guides his campaigns, but each battle teaches Akbar more than any book. His mind is hungry, not just for strategy, for understanding. One curious detail Akbar never learns to read or write, not out of laziness. His tutors tried. but his dyslexia, or perhaps a neurological quirk, made letters swim on the page. So instead, he becomes a listener, a memorizer, and a master of oral tradition. He invites readers into his chambers nightly, absorbing philosophy, poetry, legal codes, and epics by ear alone. Entire tomes take shape in his memory. Some historians debate the extent of Akbar's illiteracy. Was he truly unable to read, or simply disinterested in it? Some believe he chose to focus on comprehension through discussion and auditory learning, turning court conversations into his classroom. Regardless, his intellect is unquestionable. You arrive with him in Agra, where he begins to shape his empire from tents into stone. The new court is a kaleidoscope, not just of people, but of ideas. There are Persian architects, Rajput warriors, Central Asian horsemen, Jain merchants, and Sufi mystics. You sip cool sherbet in the marble halls of the Diwani Khas, the hall of private audience, where debates echo late into the night. Akbar listens to everyone. He assembles a council not just of ministers but of thinkers, Sunni clerics, Shia theologians, Hindus, Jains, Zoroastrians, Jesuits. He calls it the Ibadat Khana, the house of worship, and invites them to reason together. You sit cross-legged on woven carpets as wine is served carefully, discreetly, and arguments rise like incense. Faith, ethics, governance, all are questioned. Here's something charming. Akbar's favourite companion during these sessions is a snowy white cheetah named Madhu. The animal lounges beside the emperor, purring softly while theologians quarrel. It is said the cheetah would nuzzle only Akbar, and once disrupted a heated debate by chasing a peacock through the prayer hall. By now, Akbar is not just a boy king. He is becoming legend. He abolishes the jizya tax on non-Muslims, marries Hindu princesses, and eats vegetarian meals on Jain holy days. He promotes a policy he calls sul-i-kul, universal peace, but not everyone is pleased. Orthodox scholars grow uneasy. Some nobles grumble that the emperor is growing too tolerant, too curious, too unconventional, and yet the empire thrives. Still, scholars wonder how deeply Akbar's religious experiments affected the common people. Were his reforms felt only in elite circles? Did rural communities even know of the Ibadat Khana's theological salons? Debate continues. Some suggest his universalism was symbolic more than systemic, but in court it was real enough to unsettle tradition. As the day fades, you walk the halls of Fatehpur Sikri, the city Akbar builds from scratch in red sandstone. There are wide courtyards, playful haraka balconies, secret stairwells and airy pavilions. Children chase pigeons through arcades. Musicians play in shaded cloisters. Somewhere, a eunuch pours rosewater into silver bowls. You settle beneath a frangipani tree as Akbar passes by. Older now, taller, his beard beginning to grey, but the spark remains, the unshakable calm, the interest in every detail. He glances your way just once, and though you are invisible, you feel seen. You awaken beneath an arched colonnade, the faint scent of ink and old parchment drifting through the air. The morning sun filters through jali windows, casting lacework shadows on smooth red stone. Today, you're not in a palace or garden. You are in a library, a Mughal library, and not just any library, Akbar's. The walls are lined with low shelves stacked with manuscripts, wrapped in embroidered cloth, marked with red silk ribbons, or stored in sandalwood boxes. Scribes whisper as they work, and the occasional sound of a sharpened reed pen scratching against palm leaf or paper fills the space like birdsong. Akbar sits cross-legged on a cushioned dais, not reading, but listening. A court reciter holds a manuscript of the Mahabharata, recently translated into Persian at Akbar's request. Hindu epics, once considered foreign to the Persianate elite, are now recited in elegant flowing prose. You glance around the room, Muslim scholars sit beside Hindu pandits. Jesuit priests sip pomegranate juice quietly in the corner, and a Sufi poet chuckles softly to himself. This is Akbar's literary court, a place of translation, collaboration, and occasional chaos. The Mughal passion for books is legendary. Under Akbar's patronage, the Kitabkhana, or Royal Atelier, becomes a centre of manuscript production. You walk among artists bent over stretched paper, applying mineral pigments and delicate gold accents. These are no ordinary books, they are masterpieces. Not only are texts being copied, but also illuminated. Margins bloom with flowering vines, battle scenes spill across pages, and every character is exquisitely rendered in vibrant detail. One delightful detail, Akbar had a fondness for placing himself in illustrated manuscripts. He appears in paintings of past events he didn't witness, a quiet way of stepping into the mythology of empire. Sometimes he's seated among prophets, sometimes in court scenes from ancient India. It's a little wink from the emperor himself, blurring lines between memory and majesty. But this fusion of cultures also sparks debate. You overhear murmurs of disapproval. Why must the Vedas be rendered in Persian? Why depict the prophet's companions with faces? Should sacred text be illustrated at all? Akbar, ever diplomatic, nods thoughtfully and commissions another translation. The project closest to his heart is the Razumnama, a Persian version of the Mahabharata, richly illustrated and read aloud in evening salons. The effort takes years, involving teams of scholars and scribes. You sit in on a session where translators pause to debate a single word. Should Dharma be rendered as Shariat, as justice, or left untranslated altogether? Historians still question whether these translations reflected deep understanding or mere political harmony. Some argue they sanitized complexity. Others see them as rare moments of genuine cultural exchange. In the corner, you spot Abul Fazl, Akbar's chief ideologue and chronicler. He's writing the Akbarnama, a grand narrative of the emperor's life and deeds. His pen flows like the Yamuna in spring, each word an offering, but you notice the tone, reverent, even worshipful. Akbar is no longer just a man. He is described as a near-perfect ruler, guided by divine reason. You can't help but wonder, where does biography end and hagiography begin? Still, the intellectual ferment is palpable. Scribes translate the Ramayana, the Yoga Vasista, and even treatises on mathematics and medicine. Scholars from distant lands arrive with texts under their arms. Greek commentaries, Chinese maps, Arabic astronomy. Some come hoping to convert the emperor. Others come simply to learn. One morning, you stroll through the courtyard and hear two children reciting verses in tandem, one in Persian, one in Sanskrit. Their voices are high and clear, their shadows long on the stone tiles, a moment of perfect harmony, whether scripted or spontaneous. It lingers with you like a forgotten melody. As twilight falls, oil lamps flicker beside rows of books. Musicians begin to tune their sitars. The library is quiet now, not with silence, but with deep thought. Akbar leans back against a silk pillow, eyes closed, listening to a passage from the Upanishads. He smiles, not because he agrees, but because he understands. You awaken beneath a silken canopy, the scent of rosewater drifting on a warm afternoon breeze. A small golden bell chimes in the distance, signalling the arrival of midday at court. You are in Fatehpur Sikri, Akbar's capital carved from red sandstone, a city that seems to rise not from the earth, but from the dreams of a ruler who believes governance begins in the imagination. The court is alive today with conversation, colour and character, and among the figures gathered beneath the jarakas and shaded pavilions are Akbar's legendary 9 jewels. You recognise them by reputation and bearing. There is Abul Fazl, the eloquent chronicler whose pen shapes history with devotion. Beside him sits his brother, Faizi, a poet whose verses drift between Persian mysticism and courtly riddles. Raja Birbal leans in with a mischievous grin, the Hindu Brahmin whose wit charms even the sternest courtiers. You spot Tansen, adjusting the strings of his Rudra Veena, preparing to stir the very monsoon with his raga. This is no ordinary cabinet. This is a constellation. Artists, warriors, philosophers, mathematicians, and musicians orbiting a ruler who gathers intellect like a collector of rare stones. You sit quietly among them, invisible but present, as courtiers sip sherbet and debate the properties of colour. One suggests that blue is the colour of sorrow, another argues it reflects wisdom. Tansen counters by playing a scale so hauntingly beautiful that no one dares speak afterward. The moment holds like breath in the air. The 9 jewels are not merely decoration. Each plays a role in Akbar's complex court, a court that blends function and theatre, governance and philosophy. Raja Toda Mal reorganises land revenue systems with mathematical precision. Mullah do Piazza offers sly satire cloaked in parables. You even hear rumours of figures not always officially counted among the 9, women poets, astronomers, and calligraphers whose names do not always survive the pages of official record, but whose voices echo just as brightly. And here's a delightful quirk. Birbal, the famed wit of Akbar's court, was so beloved by the emperor that Akbar wept openly upon his death, an uncommon show of emotion for a sovereign. Birbal's clever tales would later evolve into folk tales told to children across northern India, making him not just a historical advisor, but a figure of bedtime legends. Not everything is harmonious. Of course, you sense tension between the orthodox factions and the more liberal scholars. Some critics whisper that Akbar surrounds himself with flatterers. Others argue that Faizi and Abul Fazl manipulate language to shape the emperor's image too carefully. Historians still debate the actual influence of these jewels. Were they truly powerful advisors, or symbolic courtiers positioned to impress foreign dignitaries? No clear answer presents itself, but from your place among the cushions, it is obvious that Akbar thrives on their presence. He is the kind of mind that sparks brighter when it is reflected by others. You walk with the court through the Diwani Khas, the hall of private audience, where Akbar often engages in spirited discussion. Here, beneath a central pillar carved like a blooming lotus, Akbar sits surrounded by steps that lead upward like a multi-petalled flower. It is both stage and statement, the emperor at the centre, held aloft not by brute force, but by conversation, and always, always, music fills the air. You sit with Tansen one evening as he tunes a new melody. His voice is like water over stone. A story circulates that he once sang Rag Deepak so powerfully that nearby lamps burst into flame. Skeptical scholars call it myth, but you're not so sure. You feel the temperature shift, ever so slightly, as he begins to hum. Night descends gently, bringing with it a quiet breeze. The 9 jewels gather once more, not to strategize, but to watch the moon rise over the sandstone pavilions. Faisi recites a verse about impermanence. Abul Fazl murmurs a line about the weight of time, and Akbar. He listens, hands folded, a smile ghosting across his face. In this moment, the empire does not feel like a conquest, or even a kingdom. It feels like a mind stretched across many rooms, whispering gently to itself. You awaken to the scent of ink, gum arabic, and pigment. The walls around you are covered in paintings, not hanging from nails, but bound inside illuminated manuscripts and laid carefully on silken cloth. You're in the imperial atelier of Jahangir, Akbar's son, where art is no longer just patronized, it is worshipped. The emperor himself sits nearby, reclined on a low divan beneath a white silk awning. His fingers are long and elegant, his beard carefully trimmed, and his eyes, sharp, almost feline, are fixed on a miniature painting being presented for inspection. It shows a falcon in mid-flight, wings frozen in perfect symmetry, talons outstretched. You watch as Jahangir gently lifts a brush and adjusts a detail himself. Jahangir was born as Prince Salim, but upon ascending the throne, he adopted a name that means world conqueror, and yet you find him more fascinated by conquering detail than territory. He rules from within frame and ink, from peacock feathers and jewelled borders. The Mughal painting tradition, cultivated under Akbar, blossoms into exquisite refinement under Jahangir. Gone are the large, action-filled battle scenes. In their place, exquisite portraits, quiet moments, studies of nature so precise they could rival a scientist's journal. You walk beside an artist sketching a zebra brought from East Africa, its stripes drawn so carefully they seem to shimmer on vellum. There is even a story, perhaps apocryphal, that Jahangir kept a register of every flower that bloomed in his garden each season, recorded in delicate paintings beside notes on their fragrance and taste. Was it true, some historians wonder, but the paintings survive, and they feel too tender to be invented entirely. You watch as court painters, many of them Hindu artists trained in Mughal techniques, blend Persian precision with Indian colour and texture. The result is a uniquely Mughal visual language. Skin tones glow like lacquer, silk shimmers, birds appear mid-breath. Some painters sign their work secretly in corners, others remain forever anonymous, their brilliance absorbed into the emperor's vision. Jahangir's court is not only a place of art, it is also a stage for ceremony. You attend a daily Jaroka darshan, where Jahangir appears at a palace window to receive the gaze of his people. It's quiet, reverent, and strangely theatrical. He wears robes of translucent cotton, jewels at the throat, and behind him a golden halo painted onto the wall, not for religious reasons, but to emphasize his status as a divine-lighted sovereign. Some historians argue he took the title Shadow of God on Earth too seriously. Others see it as just another layer of courtly performance. Amid this elegance, a lighter detail floats through the halls. Jahangir loved wine. Deeply, passionately. So much so that at one point, his physicians had to devise a weaning process involving measured quantities in increasingly smaller goblets. he once issued a decree limiting public drunkenness, signed, of course, while enjoying a goblet of his own. Still, his mind remains sharp. He maintains a detailed journal, the Tuzuki Jahangiri, recording dreams, omens, judgments, and the movements of tigers in the wild. You read passages aloud with a quiet smile. His tone shifts between emperor and poet, often within a sentence. Not all is peaceful, of course. Rebellions simmer. Relations with the Portuguese and British shift like sand, and even within the palace, politics stir. His son, Prince Khurram, the future Shah Jahan, grows impatient. Courtiers form factions. You feel the tension beneath the painted calm, and yet the artistry continues. You sit beside a table where a goldfinch is being painted, every feather lovingly detailed. The court's greatest ambition seems to be this: to capture a single moment, one bird, one bloom, one gaze, and make it eternal. As dusk falls, Jahangir retires to a scented garden, his wine diluted with rosewater, his lap heavy with illustrated books. You watch him turn the pages slowly, then pause, not to read, but to simply look. Here, in the quiet space between colour and silence, the empire breathes. You awaken behind a delicate Jali screen, sunlight dappled across your robes in soft lattice patterns. The scent of sandalwood and jasmine lingers in the air. You are in the harem quarters of Jahangir's court, a space hidden from public view yet central to the empire's rhythm, and seated at the heart of it all, adorned in soft silks, with a string of pearls resting gently at her neck, is Nur Jahan, the light of the world. She does not look toward you. She does not need to. Every movement of the court bends subtly in her direction. Nur Jahan was not born royal. Her family fled from Persia, seeking shelter in Akbar's empire. Her father rose through the ranks as a talented administrator. She married young, was widowed, and entered court life without fanfare. But then came Jahangir, and everything changed. Their love story is one of the few openly celebrated in Mughal records. Jahangir was not just taken with her beauty, but her mind, her wit, her diplomacy, her understanding of the court's pulse. Soon, she was no longer just a favoured wife. She was issuing royal orders, minting coins in her name, sitting behind the emperor's throne during state councils. You watch her quietly dictate correspondence, receive envoys, even arbitrate between rival factions. One afternoon, you follow her to a garden pavilion, where she reviews new textile designs. Nur Jahan is a trendsetter, not by chance, but by strategy. She introduces the flowing peshwas, popularizes rose-scented atars, and favours delicate embroidery with subtle motifs. Her aesthetic becomes empire-wide fashion. A charming detail, Nur Jahan was a noted huntress. Multiple accounts describe her riding into the jungle, bow in hand, silks flying behind her, firing from horseback with precision that stunned even seasoned warriors. One tale speaks of her felling 4 tigers in a single day, a feat commemorated in court poetry and immortalized in miniature paintings. But her influence also breeds tension. Court nobles whisper behind closed doors. A woman, they say, should not sit in imperial council, should not wield the seal of empire. Some resent her family, the powerful Nur Jahan junta, as it was later called, and accuse her of manipulating Jahangir's increasing dependence on wine and opium. Historians, even today, remain divided. Was she the stabilizing force that held the empire together during Jahangir's faltering years, or did she overreach, sowing seeds of factionalism that would bloom in later reigns. The record, like the latticework around you, reveals only glimpses through its shadows. Still, in this moment, Nur Jahan is undeniable. You walk with her through a marble corridor where petitions are hung in folds of silk. She pauses, reading each one, a widow seeking land, a merchant unfairly taxed, a scholar requesting funds to finish a translation. She answers them all with ink and seal. You follow her to a sunset prayer beside a reflecting pool. She kneels, not as a ruler, but as a woman who has risen, not through inheritance, but through intelligence. The water reflects her silhouette, flickering with soft torchlight. You notice her fingers linger on a ring inscribed with a Persian couplet. If there is a paradise on earth, it is this, it is this, it is this. Later, as she reclines in the perfumed hush of evening, she reviews miniature paintings, one of Jahangir offering her a rose, another of herself, bow in hand, in the hush of a jungle hunt. You wonder if she sees herself as history sees her, commanding, elegant, controversial, or simply as someone who answered the call of her moment. She never bears a child of her own, and yet her legacy flows through art, architecture, and policy, through silk-threaded shawls and rose-scented wind, through whispers in corridors and paintings that still gaze. Centuries later, you rest beneath the stars now, beside the jasmine she once planted. The night is soft, but the presence of Nur Jahan lingers, not like a ghost, but like perfume in a closed room. You awaken as the sun rises in a flush of gold over the Yamuna river. A low mist clings to the riverbanks, and across the water, marble glows like morning dew turned to stone. The Taj Mahal, barely visible through the haze, begins to emerge, its dome not yet radiant, but promising brilliance. You are now in the reign of Shah Jahan, Jahangir's son and Nur Jahan's former son-in-law. His court is one of measured grandeur, shadowed symmetry, and fragile beauty. Shah Jahan, whose name means King of the World, rules with a love for perfection. Where his father celebrated intimacy and detail, Shah Jahan favours monumentality. You walk through his newly built red fort in Delhi, wide boulevards, expansive courts, pavilions adorned with pietra dura inlays. No corner is left untouched. Even the shadows here feel designed. The court is hushed, precise, and solemn. Gone are the exuberant debates of Akbar's days. Now, protocol dominates. Courtiers bow in unison. Gifts are unwrapped with ceremonial pauses, and silences are just as important as words. You attend a court audience where the only sound for several minutes is the breeze stirring through marble grills. Then, a decree, soft, final, and beautifully phrased. But of course, it is not the red fort that defines Shah Jahan's legacy. It is the Taj. You watch as artisans carve translucent lotus petals into white marble. Inlay workers press tiny jewels, lapis, onyx, jasper, into vine-shaped channels. The air smells of lime mortar and polished stone. The entire project is a symphony of craft, devotion, and grief. The story is well known. Shah Jahan's beloved wife, Mumtaz Mahal, died during childbirth in 1631. Stricken with sorrow, the emperor commissioned a tomb unlike any the world had seen, a mausoleum that would immortalize love through architecture. But here's something less often told. Construction of the Taj Mahal disrupted local economies. Labourers were diverted from other projects. Skilled artisans became overworked. and rural complaints filtered into court letters. Some historians argue the monument, while breathtaking, marked the beginning of imperial overreach, beauty bought at the edge of exhaustion. Was it devotion? Was it ego? The debate continues. You drift through the inner chamber of the Taj, where the cenotaphs of Shah Jahan and Mumtaz lie side by side. The room echoes softly. Even your breath feels sculpted. The real tombs are below, in a more humble crypt, a quiet fact the emperor preferred not to highlight. Outside, in the Charbagh Gardens, water channels reflect the dome with perfect clarity. Children's voices float on the air, vendors sell rose petals, and distant flutes carry into the breeze. You sit beside a gardener who has tended these grounds for decades. He tells you a story that when the Taj's minarets were built, they were angled ever so slightly outward, so they would fall away from the dome in an earthquake, whether true or not. It feels like something a ruler obsessed with symmetry might plan, and Shah Jahan was obsessed. His sense of balance extended to every part of life. You observe him organizing manuscripts by the geometry of their margins. Even military campaigns were charted like calligraphy, elegant arcs across plains, each movement in careful rhythm. Yet beneath this marble surface, cracks form. His sons, especially Aurangzeb, grow impatient. You sense it in whispered messages, delayed reports, the sudden hush when a name is mentioned too loudly. Shah Jahan, aging and increasingly withdrawn, spends hours staring across the river at the Taj from his palace at Akbar fort. One detail lingers with you. It is said that in his final years, imprisoned by his son, Aurangzeb, Shah Jahan kept a small mirror angled to reflect the Taj Mahal. He could no longer walk its gardens, but he watched it bloom across the river each morning. As dusk settles, you walk back through those same gardens. The fountains fall silent. The marble dome fades into shadow, but its memory lingers in the air like a lullaby carved in stone. Shah Jahan's empire may bend beneath the weight of its own beauty, but tonight it glows with unmatched grace, soft, mournful, and eternal. You awaken to the sound of hooves on wet earth and the distant thunder of drums. The sky above is dark, not from night, but from the pregnant grey of monsoon clouds gathering over the Deccan plateau. The empire is no longer bathed in golden light. It now trudges through rain and mud under a different rhythm. Aurangzeb has taken the throne, and with him arrives a colder, more austere reign, the son of Shah Jahan. Aurangzeb was never content to wait. You remember the court tensions of earlier years, the slow silences that preceded his bold march toward power. He did not inherit the throne. He seized it. 2 brothers defeated, 1 imprisoned, and his father, the builder of the Taj, locked away in Agra fort. It was not a transition bathed in ceremony, but in calculation. You find yourself among soldiers, riding through soaked landscapes and fortresses carved into rock. Aurangzeb's court moves with him, not in lavish pageantry, but in disciplined rhythm. Gold is replaced by steel, and court musicians fall quiet. The emperor prays 5 times a day, copies the Quran by hand, and dresses in white cotton robes. His reign is not one of gardens and wine, but of rule books and commands. And yet, the empire expands. You trace the borders on maps drawn with fine ink into the Deccan, into Bengal, pressing against the Maratha strongholds. Aurangzeb spends more than half his reign on military campaigns, longer than any Mughal before him. You sleep in tents pitched on battlegrounds. You awaken to strategy councils held beneath monsoon skies. Here's a curious detail despite his orthodox image. Aurangzeb was a skilled veena player in his youth. He even studied music under court musicians before turning away from it later in life. Some say he banned music from court entirely. Others note that private performances continued discreetly, behind curtains, in whispered tones, away from his eyes but not his ears. The question lingers, was his austerity total, or selectively enforced? Historians still debate how far his policies reached. Did he truly purge art from the court, or merely shift its direction? Some paintings survive from his reign, more subdued, certainly, but still rich in craftsmanship. What cannot be denied is his focus on law. You sit beside him as he pores over texts of fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, seeking to align governance with religious principles. He commissions the Fatwa-e-Alamgiri, a comprehensive compilation of Hanafi legal rulings. It is detailed, meticulous, and deeply conservative. But this legal rigour comes at a cost. The empire grows heavier, taxes press down on farmers, the jizya tax on non-Muslims is reinstated. Temples are occasionally destroyed in politically sensitive areas. Tensions rise. You walk through cities where silence falls at your arrival, a quiet unease that Akbar's era of sulh-i-kul seems long gone. Yet, for all his piety, Aurangzeb is pragmatic when needed. He hires Hindu officials, promotes Rajput generals, and tolerates practices he publicly disapproves of when it suits empire building. He is not a zealot, but a ruler trying to impose order on a realm too vast for order to ever fully hold. In the Deccan, his greatest struggle unfolds, a protracted war against the Marathas, whose guerrilla tactics and terrain mastery frustrate even the most disciplined Mughal armies. You spend years moving through rainforests and forts, watching supply lines falter and morale fade. The war drags on and on. The emperor ages in the saddle. You sit with him one evening as he scratches notes into his Quran with fading ink. He is thin now, his beard silvered. He writes not of glory but of weariness. His empire is vast, yes, perhaps larger than ever before, but fragile, like an overstretched tent in a rising wind. One final image remains with you. Aurangzeb on his deathbed leaves behind no marble tomb. He asks to be buried in a simple grave without inscription, in the soil of Kuldabad. When you visit it later, it is plain, just an earthen mound surrounded by white jasmine bushes, a ruler of unmatched ambition, resting in anonymity. And as you sit by that modest grave, birdsong overhead, you sense the tension that defines his legacy, devotion and division, discipline and decline, simplicity shadowed by the burdens of empire. You awaken to a rustle of parchment and the smell of wax seals softening in the midday sun. The court is no longer a place of decisive command. It is a place of correspondence. Letters arrive from distant provinces. Some are wrapped in silk, others scrawled hastily on crumpled paper. You're now in the years after Aurangzeb, where the Mughal Empire begins to fray, not with a crash, but a quiet unravelling. The court still sits in Delhi, but its majesty feels brittle. Emperors still wear jewelled turbans and sit upon cushioned thrones, but real power begins to leak from beneath their feet, flowing outward to governors, warlords, and traders. You walk the halls of the Red Fort and feel the strain in the air. Nobles eye each other cautiously. Messengers dart in and out. Everyone is waiting for the next rebellion, or alliance, or rumour of one. One morning, you help sort the imperial correspondence. You run your fingers over letters from Rajput chieftains, Sikh leaders, Deccan generals, and, increasingly, the British East India Company. The language is still courtly, the greetings ornate, but there's a note of steel beneath the sugar. A fascinating moment you observe a gathering in the Diwani cars, where a Mughal prince debates trade tariffs with an English delegate. The prince quotes Persian poetry, while the Englishman speaks through an interpreter with a thick Bristol accent. The negotiation is oddly polite, but both sides know what's shifting. The British bring gifts, clocks, rifles, telescopes, and requests for trade monopolies that sound more like demands. You pass through the Zenana quarters, once filled with the laughter of poets and musicians, now quiet. The Emperor, Bahadur Shah Askulem, or perhaps Farrukhsiyar, depending on the year, receives visitors only briefly. He is weary. The Court Chronicle describes processions and poetry readings, but in truth, many events are cancelled. The empire is still called Mughal, but it's a name echoing more in memory than might. Still, small rituals continue. You attend a moonlit mushaira, a poetry gathering, in a hidden courtyard. Courtiers recite verses of longing and loss. One poet, young and proud, weaves Urdu and Persian into a single verse so delicate it draws tears. Another performs a satire mocking court etiquette to muffled laughter. You realise the empire may be politically strained, but culturally it still glows with quiet brilliance. One light-hearted anecdote. It's said that an emperor of this period once held an audience in which an elephant, trained to bow, was declared a better listener than several ministers. Whether or not it happened exactly so. The story spread through Delhi's tea houses with gleeful whispers. Meanwhile, outside the court walls, the Marathas are rising. So are the Sikhs in Punjab. The British and French are circling the ports like gulls over spilled grain. The empire's own provinces begin to act like states unto themselves. Awadh, Hyderabad, Bengal, each ruled by a Nawab or Subadar who pays lip service to Delhi while charting his own course. Historians debate when exactly the Mughal Empire fell. Was it after Aurangzeb, after Nader Shah's invasion, after 1857? The decline, they say, is more a long dusk than a sunset, each hour dimmer than the last, but never entirely dark. You walk now through a corridor where scrolls of land records are being tied with red string. The clerks sigh. Revenue is short. Corruption flourishes in the absence of firm oversight. You see receipts scribbled in margins, bribes wrapped in poetry, and yet you also see resilience. A painter still mixes lapis lazuli with gum arabic. A scholar copies a lost Greek text into Persian. A dancer practices in silence, awaiting a patron who may never arrive. As night falls, you step into a garden lit with paper lanterns. The fragrance of tuberose hangs in the air. A veena plays softly in the distance. Somewhere behind you, another letter arrives, sealed, scented, uncertain. The Mughal court, though weakened, still murmurs, still remembers, still writes. You awaken to the hush that precedes catastrophe, the stillness of a city holding its breath. The sky is bright over Delhi, but the people move with wary glances. You hear murmurs in the alleys, stifled conversations in marketplaces. Something approaches. And then, as you step onto the ramparts of the Red Fort, you see the glint of a distant army. Nader Shah of Persia has arrived. It is 1739, You're witness to one of the most traumatic moments in Mughal history. The Persian ruler, fierce, efficient, and impossibly fast, has swept down through Kabul, bypassed Mughal defences, and now stands before the gates of Delhi. The Mughal emperor at this time, Muhammad Shah Rangila, is ill-prepared. You see him in his chambers, silks rumpled, eyes wide, courtiers frozen around him, and then surrender. Negotiations fail, a massacre follows. You walk the blood-stained streets in disbelief. Nader Shah enters Delhi not like a guest, but like a storm. The peacock throne, that legendary symbol of Mughal splendour, is taken. So is the Koh-i-Noor diamond, along with untold quantities of treasure. You see Persian soldiers loading crates of gilded objects, tapestries, jade, and books onto carts. What took generations to build is removed in days. Here's a chilling detail. Some sources claim the massacre began over a rumour, a false whisper that Nader Shah had been killed, triggering chaos and bloodshed. Whether true or not, the death toll was staggering. Delhi was left stunned, traumatised, its wealth gone, its pride shattered, and yet, in the strangest of turns, Nader Shah eventually withdraws. He leaves the city hollow, but intact. You watch as he departs through the Lahore gate, his soldiers singing, the peacock throne bouncing gently in its saddle frame, a ghost train of empire. Muhammad Shah remains emperor, in title at least. You see him back in the Diwani Khas, now quiet, now smaller. The court resumes, music returns, poetry is recited, gardens are pruned, but something fundamental has changed. You can feel it. It is not just treasure that has been taken, it is certainty. One curious tidbit: Muhammad Shah, for all his failings as a statesman, was known for reviving the arts of fashion and classical Indian music. He popularised a refined style of dress and was deeply fond of Thumri singing. His reign may have ended in loss, but culturally it echoed with softness. Still, you sense the shift. You move through the palace halls where doors creak more loudly now, where fountains run slower, nobles argue more, funds arrive late, soldiers go unpaid. In the provinces, local rulers begin to act with more independence. You see Hyderabad declaring its own coins. In Bengal, trade grows without Delhi's blessing. In the Maratha heartland, power blooms defiantly. Historians differ on how to interpret this moment. Was Nader Shah's raid the final fracture, or merely one of many tremors in a long decline? Some say it merely accelerated what was already happening, a fading empire, overly centralised, stretched too thin. Others argue it was a psychic break after Nader Shah. The Mughal emperors would never again be perceived as invulnerable. You wander through the shattered remnants of Delhi's bazaars. The marble facades still gleam in places, but cracks have appeared, both literal and political. You see a young scribe copying a Persian couplet onto a page of dusty vellum. What was Delhi once, but a garden of paradise now? Its flowers are ash, yet the people endure. In a quiet courtyard, you see a boy painting a miniature, his brush fine as a hair, his focus unwavering. A musician plucks a melody on a worn sitar, notes echoing through the ruined air. A woman lights a lamp before an alcove shrine, her face steady. Even now, beauty clings to the bones of the empire. You return to the Red Fort, where the emperor sits beneath a mirrored canopy. His robes shine, his eyes are tired. The empire still exists, on paper, in ritual, in name, but its centre has been robbed, not just of gold, but of belief. You awaken in a narrow chamber filled with soft cushions, the scent of old perfume lingering in the velvet drapes. Outside, the Mughal court still holds its ceremonies, but inside, things are quieter, thinner, like an echo of former glory. You're in a shadow durbar where emperors still reign, but only in name. The empire, now in the mid-18th century, is a ghost of its former self, not yet gone, but no longer whole. You watch as a small group of courtiers gathers in the Diwani Khas, no longer gleaming with grandeur but still adorned with fading gilded calligraphy. The emperor, perhaps Ahmad Shah Bahadur or Alamgir, wears a robe more ceremonial than powerful. His eyes shift often, his words carefully chosen. Around him stand advisors, poets, eunuchs, and loyalists who carry on the rituals of court life even as authority slips further away. A strange quiet has taken hold of Delhi. You walk through a garden where the fountains still trickle, but no one listens to their music anymore. A poet recites verses, and only one or two heads nod in appreciation. The others watch the horizon, listening not to poetry, but to rumours. Outside Delhi, the real power lies with the Marathas, the Sikhs, the newly assertive regional governors, and increasingly, the British. The East India Company has transformed from merchant venture to military power. You read a letter written in stiff Persian praising an English officer, and you realise the language of diplomacy remains Mughal, but the decisions no longer are. One human detail lingers with you. It's said that a Mughal prince, living in partial exile in Lucknow, spent his afternoons writing ghazals and composing music, even as his pension from the company dwindled. He held poetry salons in candlelight, attended only by a handful of aging scholars. The empire, in this moment, survives not in armies, but in couplets. You observe a durbar held in Lahore, where a regional governor reads out an imperial farman from the emperor in Delhi. Everyone listens politely, but behind the veil of civility, decisions are already made locally. The emperor's seal still commands respect, but only the kind reserved for fading traditions. Some scholars call this the era of post-Mughal sovereignty, a time when the empire existed as a cultural and symbolic force more than a political one. Others argue it was still very much an empire, just transformed, a network of loosely affiliated rulers orbiting a centre that no longer held. You step into the home of a miniature painter, now in his old age. He remembers the days of Shah Jahan. His brush still dances over paper, but fewer commissions arrive. He tells you, with a gentle smile, that he now paints birds as village scenes, less gold leaf, more soft blue washes. You watch as he completes an image of a single heron standing by a lotus pond. The painting is small, quiet, perfect, and so too is the court now. Not grand, but intricate. You sit in a salon where poetry is recited with tears. You walk a veranda where dancers rehearse, knowing their audience grows smaller. You attend a wedding at court where the gifts are modest, but the songs are sung with more longing than ever before. And hear something oddly touching during one festival. You watch courtiers carefully repaint the palace gates, not because they expect visitors, but because tradition demands it. Even in decline, the rituals continue. The empire has become a habit of beauty. At night, the emperor walks through the moonlit gardens. He speaks little. His robe is threadbare at the edges, but he pauses to admire the night jasmine, still blooming, even now. You realise this is a court in exile, not geographic exile, but existential. Power may be gone, but culture lingers. As long as poetry is recited, as long as the ghazal echoes in a marble hallway, something of the empire survives. You awaken to the sound of ticking, slow, deliberate, mechanical, a pocket watch, its silver face engraved with English script, tick steadily in the palm of a Mughal prince. You are in Delhi, but time now belongs to another rhythm. The British East India Company has moved from distant influence to immediate presence. The court still holds on to its Persianate grandeur, but it now shares space with waistcoats, rifles, and legal contracts inked in a foreign hand. You sit beside the Emperor, Shah Alam II, perhaps, as he listens to a company official deliver a revenue report. The Englishman bows respectfully, yet his tone carries quiet certainty. The Emperor nods, signs, receives gifts of cut glass and Bengal textiles, then retires to a chamber filled with the scent of sandalwood and the long sighs of eunuchs who remember when things were different. The company has begun its transformation from trade syndicate to ruling power. You read the Farman of 1765, issued by the Emperor, granting the East India Company Diwani rights, permission to collect taxes in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. It is a document signed under duress, written in eloquent Persian, and it changes the shape of India forever. In return, the Emperor receives a modest pension and protection. But the balance is clear. Delhi is now under the shadow of a foreign corporation. You pass through the once glorious Diwan-i-Am, where now company clerks sort documents and sip watered-down tea. And yet, not everything is lost. You attend an evening gathering at court where Urdu poetry flows like scented wine. A nobleman recites couplets that slyly mock the English in veiled metaphor. A dancer spins, her ghungroos echoing against the marble, drowning out the tick of distant clocks. A delightful curiosity during this time, Mughal princes began learning English, not fluently, but enough to exchange greetings, read company documents, or pen the occasional awkward letter. There are stories of court tutors blending Shakespeare and Ghalib, creating a curious linguistic stew that amused more than it educated. The architecture, too, begins to shift. You walk through buildings where European-style cornices sit awkwardly atop Mughal arches. Gardens feature imported roses beside native champa. A new hybrid emerges, not quite British, not quite Mughal, a style made of compromise and contradiction. Some scholars argue that the Mughal court adapted skillfully to British pressure, that it survived not by strength, but by accommodation. Others say this was merely decline disguised as diplomacy. Was the court truly influencing company decisions, or merely performing relevance for its own comfort? No answer satisfies fully, eyes. You watch as a Mughal prince discusses celestial movements with a British surveyor. They point to stars, disagree politely, and draw maps on rice paper. Around them, the empire is shrinking, but for a moment, the conversation feels infinite. In a quieter corner of the palace, you observe the women's quarters, where life goes on in layers. Court ladies still embroider with golden thread, tell stories passed down from Akbar's time, and tend rose gardens while the city beyond changes rapidly. The Zanana is both a sanctuary and a relic, protected from the world, but also left behind by it. One evening, you visit the Emperor's private chamber, where he gazes out toward the Yamuna. He speaks softly to a British official about peace, pensions, and poetry. The two men sit beside each other on brocade cushions. One is dressed in gold-trimmed silk, the other in wool and brass buttons. They do not speak the same first language, but they both know the conversation is not equal. Still, there is dignity. Shah Alamdu, blinded late in life, still recites verse from memory. He composes couplets about loss that make even hardened company officers pause in silence. His empire may be limited to Delhi's walls, but within those walls, he is still sovereign of mood, rhythm, and rhyme. You leave the chamber with a strange mixture of sorrow and awe. The Mughal court, once a force of empire, is now a palace of performance. But what a performance! Elegant, melancholic, endlessly graceful. The clocks tick on. The English files grow thicker. But inside these red sandstone walls, the last rays of Mughal twilight shimmer, stubborn and soft. You awaken in a sunlit courtyard where pigeons coo softly and a breeze stirs pages on a low writing table. Around you sit 3 men, one in a long Persian robe, another draped in cotton dhoti, and the third in a starched British waistcoat. They are not arguing, they are translating, together. You've entered a garden of language, where Persian, Urdu, Sanskrit, Arabic, and English collide, not in war, but in scholarship. It is the late 1700s into early 1800s. The Mughal court, now more symbolic than sovereign, has become a quiet island of cultural exchange. You watch as imperial scholars and company orientalists work side by side, surrounded by scrolls, palm leaf manuscripts, and leather-bound tomes imported from Oxford. The empire may be fading, but words, curiously, are flourishing. One scholar reads aloud a verse from Kalidas's Shakuntala. Another carefully phrases it into Persian. The British officer writes it down in English, pausing to check the meter. You sit with them under the neem tree as tea is poured, and they debate whether a metaphor about mango blossoms can be accurately rendered into English without losing its sweetness. This moment is no accident. Warren Hastings, Governor-General of Bengal, had encouraged his officers to learn Indian languages. You hear names passed in hushed tones: William Jones, who founded the Asiatic Society, Charles Wilkins, who printed the first English Bhagavad Gita. These men admired India's literary past, though often with the air of museum curators, reverent but detached. One peculiar detail: you come across a copy of Newton's Principia Mathematica, translated into Persian, not to teach physics to Indian astronomers, but to demonstrate British intellectual might through Persian prose. A curious irony, empires conversing through borrowed tongues. You follow a Mughal librarian as he wanders through the court archive, muttering about British cataloguing methods. They number the pages backwards, he grumbles, and keep forgetting we write from right to left. Still, he smiles as he shows you an illustrated Ramayana copied for Akbar, now labelled Item 43.5, Epic Narrative, Hindu Mythology. You chuckle softly, yet even amid this shared curiosity, asymmetry persists. Mughal scholars now depend on company stipends. Court translators receive small salaries in company rupees. You overhear a prince debating a company officer over the best way to phrase a treaty clause. The prince speaks elegant Persian. The officer responds in dry legal English. Both nod, but neither fully understands the other. Historians continue to argue whether this exchange was sincere or exploitative. Did the British really value Indian knowledge, or were they preparing to rule by learning the language of their subjects? Some see the scholarly flourishing as a final flowering of Mughal grace. Others see it as a quiet prelude to control. Meanwhile, poets carry on, You attend an Adabi mehfil, a literary salon in a Faden Haveli in Old Delhi. Candles flicker, musicians hum quietly. A young poet recites a verse. We studied your laws, translated your gods, but could not interpret your silence. A pause, then applause, slow, respectful, aching. In another room, you find a printer operating a wooden press. Urdu newspapers are being printed for the first time. News of uprisings, harvests, poetry competitions, and company proclamations all appear on the same page. You run your fingers over the fresh ink. This is not just preservation, it's reinvention. A small, delightful scene. Two young boys argue over whether a newly coined English word, telegram, should be translated as ta or kabachamak. Their tutor listens patiently. Language is alive, and they are among its new gardeners. As dusk settles, you walk again through the palace gardens. The trees are older, the path cracked, but a parrot calls from a mango branch in perfect Urdu, reciting a line it learned long ago, Zamana badal gaya hai, magar alfaz ab bhi zinda hai. The times have changed, but the words still live, and you believe it. Even as the court shrinks, even as Delhi's streets grow louder with boot heels and rifle drills, the Mughal mind continues to bloom, not on battlefields, but between margins, in dictionaries, in couplets, in gardens of ink. You awaken in a hushed courtyard bathed in soft winter light. The leaves of a neem tree rustle gently above, and the air is filled with the subtle sound of scratching, not of swords or rebellion, but of brush against paper. You're in the final twilight of the Mughal dynasty, and before you sits an old man with a fragile frame, deep, thoughtful eyes, and a paintbrush in hand. This is Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last emperor of the Mughals. He wears a plain white robe, not from austerity, but from preference. His court, such as it is, remains at Delhi's Red Fort, but the grandeur of his ancestors is long gone. He is not a ruler of provinces, but of poetry. His dominion is not the subcontinent, but the soul. You sit beside him as he paints a bulbul, a small nightingale favoured by Persian poets. The bird is rendered in pale washes of grey and rose, its eye delicately lined, its wings in motion. Zafar paints with care, often pausing to recite a verse aloud, matching ink to emotion. Sometimes he writes his own ghazals, curling the Urdu script into the corners of the paper like vines wrapping a trellis. Zafar's court is a gathering of poets, musicians, and mystics. You walk past a hallway where shayars recite verses to dwindling audiences. Some are retired nobles, others are schoolboys, but all nod solemnly as the words land, soft as snowfall, sharp as longing. The court's finances are poor, the walls in need of repair, but the language here is still alive. Here's a whimsical detail. Zafar kept a tame parrot that had been trained to recite lines of his favourite ghazal. It would sit on a silver perch and interrupt conversation with melancholic couplets. The emperor, it's said, would reward it with fennel seeds, bow slightly, and say, "Wah, wah." Outside the palace, Delhi has changed. Company regiments patrol the city. Railways are being laid. Telegraph wires buzz overhead. But inside the Red Fort, time slows. The emperor still holds daily audiences, more ritual than real. Visitors offer tiny gifts, a few coins, a mango, a poem. Zafar accepts them with a nod and replies with gentle words, a line of poetry, or a small sketch of a bird. The British, technically, still recognise him as sovereign of Delhi, but it is a hollow recognition. He is a pensioner on a throne. The East India Company controls the city, the revenues. the soldiers. And yet, Zafar resists bitterness. His dignity lies not in denial, but in softness. He writes, "My heart is no longer mine. It belongs to every moment I could not hold." Historians remain divided on Zafar's significance. Some argue he was merely a symbolic figure, a shadow emperor in an age of colonial dominance. Others see him as a bridge, the last breath of the Mughal spirit, the final thread of a dynasty that had woven itself into every fibre of India's identity. You walk with him one evening through the Hayat Bakhsh Bagh, the life-bestowing garden behind the Red Fort. The fountains are dry now, the channels are cracked, but he stops beside a jasmine bush that somehow still blooms. He cups a flower gently and smiles. In the small marble mosque nearby, he offers prayer, not loudly, not with ceremony, but as a private rhythm, a whispered plea. Later, he reclines in his modest chamber, flanked by dusty books and paintings of bulbuls and miners. He reads aloud one of his own verses, his voice no more than a breath. "Na kisi ki aankh ka noor hoon, na kisi ke dil ka qarar hoon. I am neither the light of anyone's eye nor the comfort of anyone's heart." You sit quietly beside him, surrounded by fading scrolls, scattered feathers, and a soft, endless quiet. And in that quiet, the empire sleeps. You awaken in a narrow alleyway, the walls painted with faint slogans, half erased by time and monsoon rains. The year is 1857, and Delhi hums with a tension you can almost feel in your bones. You hear the clatter of horseshoes, the snap of boot leather, and above it all are whispers. Rumours ride faster than couriers now, carried by market vendors, water carriers, and weary soldiers. The great rebellion is stirring. You move through Chandni Chowk, its usual bustle muted. The British East India Company has tightened its grip across India, railways, telegraphs, taxation systems, but resentment has grown alongside the infrastructure. Soldiers of the company's Indian army, the sepoys, grumble over cartridges rumoured to be greased with cow and pig fat. To many, it is not just an offence, it is the final insult. And then it begins. You awaken again, this time to chaos. Sepoys have mutinied in Meerut and are marching toward Delhi. You run alongside them as they storm the gates. At the Red Fort, they demand something unexpected that Bahadur Shah Zafar, frail, poetic, and nearly forgotten, take up the mantle of rebellion. He hesitates. You sit beside him as he listens to the demands of the sepoys and the murmurs of his ministers. He is old, he is tired, but in that moment, perhaps remembering the ghosts of emperors past, he agrees, not for conquest, not for ambition, but for the dignity of memory. Zafar is declared a symbolic leader of the revolt. Delhi becomes, briefly, a rebel capital. You walk through the court again, no longer a soft echo, but suddenly loud with purpose. Cannons are hauled into the gardens, old halls become war rooms, poems are swapped for proclamations. Yet still, in the evenings, Zafar retreats to write verses by candlelight, often about the same birds he used to paint. One poignant moment it's said Zafar held court beneath a neem tree during the siege, still wearing a turban heavy with pearls, even as the empire crumbled around him. There is something unbearably human in that image, ceremony clinging to silence. But the company strikes back. You watch as British troops lay siege to Delhi. The walls tremble, the Yamuna runs thick, cannon smoke clouds the mosques, the gardens burn, and then, silence again. The city falls. Zafar flees. You follow him to the tomb of Humayun, where he hides among old bones and fading empire. but he is captured, brought before company officers, and accused of rebellion. The charges are heavy, though his role was mostly symbolic. He is old, his hands shake, and yet he answers with calm dignity. The trial is public. The verdict, exile. The emperor, or what remains of him, is sent to Rangoon. His sons are executed, his dynasty extinguished. You stand by as he boards the boat, head bowed, beard white, lips moving in silent verse. One lesser-known detail as Zafar was escorted from Delhi. He was allowed to take very little, just a few books, a pen, and a tiny bird cage. The parrot had long since died, but the cage remained. Perhaps he could not bear to leave behind the symbol of his gentler days. Historians still wrestle with 1857. Was it the first war of independence, a mutiny, a last gasp of empire? Some see Zafar as a tragic hero, others as a reluctant pawn. But all agree, it marked the end of the Mughal world. You return to the Red Fort. The court is gone. British barracks now fill the palace. The Diwani Khas is silent. The gardens are overgrown. The Takhti House, the peacock throne, is a memory. But carved into one marble arch, barely visible, you find a Persian inscription. If there is a paradise on earth, it is this. You finish the line under your breath, and even now, as the winds shift and the dust settles over Delhi, that line, like the emperor's final poems, continues to echo softly. You awaken beneath the archway of a red sandstone gate, the morning light filtering through broken Jali screens. The air is oddly quiet, not peaceful, but emptied, like a stage after the final scene. You're back inside the Red Fort, but the court is gone. No poets recite verses here, no courtiers whisper in corners, no emperors ascend to the throne. It is 1858 and the last Mughal Durbar has passed into silence. The British Crown has now assumed direct rule over India. The East India Company is dissolved. Queen Victoria is declared Empress of India. You read the royal proclamation, written in High English and translated into Persian and Urdu. It promises justice, equal treatment, and respect for Indian traditions. But you can feel, as you read, the weight of empire descending like fog, cold, enveloping, irreversible. The Red Fort has become a military base. British officers pace where emperors once held audience. Cannon are mounted in gardens once perfumed by rosewater fountains. The halls that echoed with regas and ghazals are now filled with footsteps and the low bark of orders. You walk among them, unseen, but watching, and the contrast is staggering. One curious moment in a former princess's chamber, now converted into an officer's club. You see a bookshelf holding both Persian poetry and manuals on railway construction. A silver teacup rests beside an abandoned ink pot. It is a strange cohabitation. Mughal memory beside colonial pragmatism. You make your way through the Diwani Khas. The once glorious hall of private audience is stripped of its carpets and cushions. The famous inscription above, still visible, reads, "If there is a paradise on earth, it is this, it is this, it is this." The British soldiers pass beneath it without reading. At the heart of the fort stands an empty marble platform, the Takhti House long gone, looted over a century earlier. You sit on its edge, running your fingers over the worn patterns, imagining the weight of imperial robes, the murmur of astrologers, the laughter of musicians. Now, all that remains is stone and air. The city of Delhi, too, is changed. You pass through lanes of old Delhi where Urdu signs are taken down and replaced with English ones. Schools now teach history from new books. You enter a classroom and see children learning about Queen Victoria. Not Akbar, not Aurangzeb, not Zafar. The past is still here, but no longer centred. Still, even in this moment of dissolution, fragments of Mughal grace remain. In a quiet alley, you see a calligrapher still practicing the Nastaliq script, copying verses by Ghalib. He dips his reed pen slowly, deliberately, writing not for a patron, but for himself. In a tea house, old men still tell stories of Akbar's wisdom and Birbul's cleverness. Children listen, wide-eyed. Even if they no longer live under a Mughal emperor, they still live within Mughal stories. A small anecdote: a British officer assigned to the fort reportedly fell in love with the rhythm of Urdu poetry and began hosting informal mehfil gatherings for both English and Indian poets. Whether sincere or performative, such exchanges still carried something precious: the persistence of beauty despite power. Historians often debate how much of the Mughal legacy survived after 1858. Some argue it was extinguished entirely, that with Bahadur Shah Zafar's exile the dynasty ended, and with it, its world view. Others say it simply shifted, flowing into literature, architecture, textiles, cuisine, memory. Not a fall, but a quiet migration into the everyday. You leave the Red Fort at dusk. The city glows with lanterns. A flute plays in the distance. The empire is gone, but its footprints remain, pressed into marble, whispered through verse, echoed in the archways. As you walk beside the Yamuna, now narrowed and silent, you turn back once more. The domes are still there, the birds still circle, and the sky, tinged with saffron and smoke, looks just as it must have looked 500 years ago, above emperors, above ruins, above all. You awaken in the early morning hush of Rangoon, now Yangon, beside a quiet riverbank. The birds call low and unfamiliar. The air carries the scent of sea salt and distant rain, and within a modest villa under British guard, an old man stirs in bed. This is Bahadur Shah Zafar, former Emperor of India, now a prisoner in exile. His court has vanished. His city lies far behind, but within his heart a faint murmur of Delhi still echoes. You sit beside him as he scribbles a verse in pencil on a thin scrap of paper. His Urdu is still elegant, though his hand now trembles. He no longer wears imperial robes. His turban has lost its feathers. But in his poetry, he is still a king, a ruler of metaphors, of regrets, of vanished days. The British treat him as a relic, not a threat. His meals are simple, his visitors limited. A few loyal attendants remain, a daughter, a scribe, a trusted servant who still addresses him as Badshah. You hear him speak softly in Persian to the jasmine growing on the veranda. "Bloom gently," he murmurs, as if you do not know where we are. And then, on November 7th, 1862, Zafar dies. You watch as the news spreads slowly, first to the guards, then to the local clerics, and finally, weeks later, across the sea to India. There is no grand funeral. The British refuse to permit any monument. He is buried in a small, unmarked grave behind a churchyard wall. One of the last Mughal verses reads, "Dogas zamin bhi na mili, kuye yaar mein." Not even 2 yards of land were granted to me in the land of my beloved. That line is carved, years later, into a modest stone. Back in India, the Mughal world continues to flicker, not in palaces, but in everyday life. You walk through the narrow lanes of old Delhi, where kebabs still sizzle in the same spice, where Urdu still sways through the evening air, where storytellers gather at dusk to share dastans beneath banyan trees. The emperors are gone, but their stories now belong to the people. You visit a Qawwali performance at the tomb of Nizamuddin Awliya. A singer offers a verse about Zafar, his voice rising into the night. The crowd closes its eyes. Some cry, others smile faintly. The Mughal soul, it seems, still has places to visit. A small, overlooked story in the years following Zafar's death. A British officer returned to Delhi and sought out one of the emperor's old miniature paintings. A bird, delicately rendered, perched on a curling branch. He framed it and kept it on his desk for decades. When asked about it, he simply said, "I was there, you see, when the world changed." Historians now agree that the Mughal Empire ended not with a single moment, but with a series of disappearances, of autonomy, of symbols, of names from ledgers. The British Empire filled the space with trains, telegrams, and tea plantations. But in the quiet corners, in the folds of fabric and the turns of phrase, the Mughal world lingered like scent in a closed room. You walk once more through the Red Fort, now a colonial outpost, later a museum. A tourist points at an inscription. A child tugs her father's sleeve and asks, "Did kings really live here?" You smile. Yes, they did. And they wrote poems to birds. As the day ends, you sit by the Yamuna, its banks overgrown. A heron lands beside you, still as marble. The water glimmers faintly. The empire has ended, but its reflection moves still, subtle, graceful, and endless. You awaken in the ruins of a once golden world. The sun rises quietly over Delhi, casting soft amber light on sandstone arches and broken lattice windows. You're no longer in a court, no longer beside emperors, but among the aftershocks of an age now folded into memory. Yet even here, in the silence of tombs and the whisper of stone walls, the Mughal court breathes, faintly, persistently. You wander through Humayun's tomb, its dome bathed in early light. You watch pigeons circle overhead, landing on carved chhatris, their coos echoing in chambers built for eternity. The symmetry still holds. The gardens are trimmed, but the visitors walk more quickly now. Few pause to read the Persian verses etched along the walls. You sit in the cool shadow of Safdarjung's tomb, where the grass grows long and the fountains have dried, and yet a painter sits nearby, sketching the arches with pencil on yellowing paper. He does not speak. He doesn't need to. The lines he draws are careful, reverent. He is documenting a mood, not a monument. You pass through Mahauli, where Zafar Mahal still stands, smaller than the great forts, but no less moving. Its courtyards are cracked, but if you listen closely, you can almost hear the music of a forgotten mehfil. A line of verse clings to the gate, weathered but legible zindagi kya hai, ek chissa hai, aur wo bhi adhura, what is life but a tale, and one unfinished. A quiet, lesser-known detail, many descendants of the Mughal dynasty continued to live in Delhi long after the fall. Some took jobs as school teachers or postmen, a few became poets, others faded into anonymity. You meet one elderly gentleman in a spice shop who claims descent from Bahadur Shah Zafar. When you ask him what that means, he shrugs gently and says, "It means I keep my shoes clean and speak politely." Scholars continue to debate the legacy. Was the Mughal court a brilliant imperial machine, a poetry-drenched dream, or a fragile relic of another world? The answer is all three, and more. It was a way of seeing, of combining beauty and bureaucracy, calligraphy and command, faith and fabric. You step into a Sufi shrine lit with rose-scented oil lamps. A singer's voice lifts into the sky, repeating lines first sung in Akbar's time. You close your eyes. The empire may be gone, but something deeper remains, a pulse, a cadence, a style of soul. As dusk falls, you walk one last time along the riverbank of the Yamuna. The water flows slowly, catching fragments of twilight in its surface. A breeze lifts. Somewhere, a flute plays. The Mughals are no longer emperors, but they are everywhere, in gardens and ghazals, in stone and scent, in memory. You pause, then step into stillness. Now, my dear sleepy listener, let your thoughts drift like petals on a quiet stream. You've wandered through centuries of splendour, gardens blooming in desert soil, voices echoing through marble halls, inked verses passed from emperor to bird to air. You've walked beside conquerors who wept for flowers, and poets who dreamed beneath broken arches. You've watched cities rise, fall, and bloom again in silence. And now, the story rests. Let the memories settle, like dust on vellum, like moonlight on polished stone. There's no need to hold them tightly. They're not gone, only sleeping. In your breath now lives the rhythm of distant ghazals. In your heartbeat, the echo of soft sandals across mirrored halls. In your dreams, a rose still opens, slowly, carefully, in the gardens of an empire that lived, and lives still, in the gentle language of beauty. So close your eyes, let go, float gently through the folds of sleep. You've walked far, listened long. The night is here,